You are listening to the global network of podcasters dedicated to the pharmacy profession. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Network.
Welcome to the PBM Reform Podcast, where we dive deep into the world of pharmaceutical benefit management, cutting through the noise to uncover the truth. Since 2019, we've been your go-to source for the latest on how PBMs impact patient care, drug pricing, and the very future of pharmacy. Here, we champion the role of pharmacists, the most knowledgeable advocates for medication safety and expertise. Join us as we expose and generate discussions that are reshaping healthcare and explore how we build a better payment system which focuses on advancing pharmacy care.
Welcome back to the PBM Reform Podcast. My name's Todd Urey, founder of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. We're thrilled that Greg Reybold has taken over the PBM Reform Podcast, dug into some major superstars in our industry. A shout out to Mr. Tony with the Tennessee Pharmacy Association. If you haven't heard the last episode, you have to go out to your favorite podcast outlet, whether that's Spotify or Apple, and take a look. It was Tennessee PBM Reform win, and boy, was it a big win, and it's just continuing. Greg, welcome back to the PBM Reform Podcast. I can't wait for you to share with our listeners today who our special guest is.
Yes. Thank you, Todd. Always enjoy the opportunity to share some time with you, and I'm excited about this one. I'd like to welcome Josh Golden to the PBM Reform Podcast today, and Josh is the Senior Vice President of Strategy for Capital RX, and this is going to be just a dynamic powerhouse of a conversation. Josh, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks, Greg.
Now, Josh and I go back. Boy, the years, we were just talking about the months click by, the years click by. I think we go back to probably like January 2020, where there was some Georgia legislation, I think is when our paths first crossed. And there was a lot of conversations at that time centering around NADAC, and we can circle to that at some point in this discussion. But Josh, if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and then about CapRx, because you guys have some just exciting things going on, leading on all sorts of fronts. I think software, platforms, technology, transparency, lowering drug costs. You guys are doing a lot of exciting stuff. So I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thanks. So my background actually is as a healthcare consultant. So prior to joining Capital RX in 2019, I spent about 20 years as a pharmacy benefits consultant, advocating for large employers, benefit plan sponsors, essentially Fortune 500 companies, large labor unions, health plans, health systems, et cetera. These were groups that are largely the payers of healthcare. They're shouldering the financial burden of healthcare here in the United States under employer-sponsored healthcare arrangements. So they were my clients. And they were faced with an industry that, frankly, was impossible to decipher and understand, right? They had to negotiate contracts with PBMs full of opacity, full of hidden revenue streams, all sorts of misaligned interests, things like that.
I don't believe it.
Okay. Believe it or not. And so I would step in, help them with contracting, help them with auditing, help them negotiating. So I've really seen these arrangements from a number of different angles and spent a lot of time, frankly, banging my head against the wall around how these arrangements were structured. I was an early advocate for PBM transparency after seeing how these misaligned interests were playing out day to day. That's ultimately what brought me to Capital RX. It's a clean sheet PBM. We started with a blank sheet of paper and ultimately built the PBM that avoids all of the misalignment that we're probably going to talk pretty candidly about today. And so that's been a real fantastic sort of destination for me to arrive at. And we've experienced a period of pretty tremendous growth as the industry is, I think, waking up right now to a lot of these challenges that, frankly, I have been screaming about for years. So
yeah, and but boy, when you want to talk about sort of like one of the original, I would say PBM interests who were actually like literally screaming for transparency and fighting, on the front line for transparency, back before maybe it was cool, if you will, right? I mean, you were there, and CapRx was there. Now you all have experienced some really really significant growth over what, a period of several years, like lives covered now. What do you ballpark?
Yeah.
Do you have a ballpark figure?
Yeah, we're around 5 million covered lives that we directly manage. And we also have an infrastructure component to our business model. So we have a platform for administration of pharmacy claims. So there's two problems we're trying to solve simultaneously. One is the financial infrastructure problem, the problem with the misaligned interest, the way that PBMs make money and how that influences their behavior in ways that work against the interest of plan sponsors. That's issue number one. Issue number two, and we learned this very early on in our journey, is we couldn't solve for issue number one unless we had modern tech that can do things differently, that can adapt.
That's interesting.
So we built a platform. We call her Judi, which is short for adjudication, which is the nerdy way of explaining how a claim is processed, right? Received from a pharmacy, determined, the pricing is determined, the cost share is determined, and ultimately people get billed and pharmacies get paid. So that is at the heart of what we do from a tech standpoint. And so we also have an element of the business that is leasing that technology now to other large PBMs.
Okay, wow. So you all are offering that technology to other PBMs to leverage. So 5 million lives. Something that stood out to me is sort of some of the breadth of where your clients are coming from. Like you have some Fortune 500 clients, you have some union clients, some government clients. Talk to us a little bit about client mix, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts on what would you attribute to the rapid growth, right? Is it the transparency? Is there sort of this thirst for increased transparency in pharmacy benefits, and is that driving the growth, or is it something else?
Yeah, it's a combination of the two things we've already mentioned. Number one, a frustration with the old world PBM financial models, and a realization that these clients, these large employers, labor unions, health plans, would go out to RFP year after year. They typically RFP in 3-year cycles for their PBM relationship. And the RFP would show this massive savings opportunity that they've been able to negotiate. And then the next year, they would implement that new PBM and costs would go up. The trend would just increase. Costs would go up. And these clients were left scratching their heads saying, I thought we were going to get savings here. And it turns out it was the behavior of the PBM that was driving those cost increases. Plenty of examples I can give you, but just the steerage of patients, for example, towards higher cost drugs that generate a higher rebate, because as you may know, PBMs quietly retain a portion of that rebate revenue stream as part of their profit model. So all of that this sort of like repeated abuse, if you will, that these employers were suffering from, those employers became our biggest opportunity. Okay. And frankly, we didn't even have to hunt them down. These were large employers, Fortune 500 companies that came knocking at our door once they heard about our business model and learned that we were doing things meaningfully differently. That became, frankly, an organic pipeline for us. We haven't had to really struggle, frankly, to find new opportunities. They're kind of coming looking for us.
They're coming. Wow, that's exciting. So you mentioned rebates. And something that struck me just reviewing your some of your materials and your website is a lot of folks throw out transparency, right? And I want to talk about what the difference is. But something that struck me is you're one of the only PBMs that I've seen that literally on your website note that not only do you have rebate pass-through, but you include all revenue from drug manufacturers, right? One of the things as you look at some of these evolving government contracts with PBMs and other contracts is, they may have this, a provision that says, hey, we're going to pass through 100% of rebates, but then they exclude from the definition of rebates, right? They have these really narrow contractual definitions of what a rebate is. And so aggregate discounts may be excluded, or rebates, fees for manufacturers for other services may be excluded, or rebates from rebate aggregators. So it just struck me, you say it, right? You say it plain as day. Hey, right, we're going to pass through all rebates and dollars coming from drug manufacturers.
Any revenue. Yeah, it really has to be all encompassing, because this industry really has a long and sordid history of maneuvering this money around, this bucket of what we casually call rebates. But when you got to understand that when a PBM, a large PBM, sits in front of Congress and testifies or looks at their client in the eye and says, we're going to give you 100% of rebates, you have to picture that word rebate with a capital R, because that is, to your point, a defined term in the contract that intentionally excludes or omits all sorts of other ancillary revenue streams that are continuing to evolve. I'll give an example. Right now, there's a pretty dramatic increase that we're tracking around value-based contracts that operate and behave a lot like rebates. They are basically rebate value rebucketed into a different format, right? Under value-based type arrangements for certain products. Those monies flow through to us as a PBM. They flow through to other PBMs as well. Trust me, this is an industry-wide phenomenon. The question is, does each PBM then choose to pass that revenue on to their plan sponsor clients? Right. Or do they say, that's not a rebate as we define it, so we're going to go ahead and quietly retain that? So these are questions that plan sponsors need to be vigilant on. Unfortunately, today's value-based contract is tomorrow's question mark. And who knows what it's going to be called tomorrow.
It evolves.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And this has happened historically multiple times through this industry. We saw it happen with what are called rebate admin fees or formulary administration fees. We see it on the network side with network fees, where a PBM will charge pharmacies for the pleasure of being part of their network, right? And in most cases, that PBM is quietly retaining that revenue, not passing that on to the plan.
Interesting you say that. I don't know if you saw the most recent Office of Inspector General audit report in connection with a federal employee health benefit plan, but it was something like $500 million in fees being charged to pharmacies that weren't passed through, despite the existence of a, quote, pass-through contract.
That's right.
And to your point about sort of evolution and the way that these things do change, I also think on the pharmacy side, recall like when our good friend Antonio Chacha, right, when he sort of blew up spread pricing in Ohio, and states started to hone in on this practice of traditional spread where, the pharmacies reimburse low and the governmental program is charged much higher. And as states started reining in on that, we started seeing shifts to, where really the spread is on the back end via effective rate recoupments, things like that, right? But it's sort of similar. It's the same game on the pharmacy side as the rebate side. It's evolving, and some of these larger PBMs find ways to continue to extract the value they want. It may just, instead of on the front end of the pharmacy transaction, maybe now it's on the back end of the pharmacy transaction, but very similar.
Yeah, that's right. And these are, this is just a peak, if you will. This is just a small sliver of the vast, diverse set of revenue streams, opaque revenue streams that traditional PBMs have relied on. And it brings us to this really fascinating existential moment for the old world PBMs that we're talking about, because in the face of looming transparency requirements, right? CAA 2026, the original CAA, DOL requirements now. These new layers of disclosure are attempting to shed light into some of these dark corners of profitability for the PBM. But that creates a very interesting problem for the old world PBM.
And what is that?
Well, it becomes a problem of move it or lose it. And by that, I mean the PBM really has two options when faced with enforced transparency, like the transparency we're now seeing through regulation and legislation. Their first option is to follow the spirit of this legislation and start revealing these layered revenue streams, put them out on the table for clients to scrutinize, move to a true fee-only model, which is we provide a sort of an example of that model.
Absolutely.
So we don't do any of all the back-end revenue streams we've been talking about. We don't do any of that. We survive as a PBM by charging a fee to our clients for the service we provide. Right? It's a one sentence profit model. I say that if it takes longer than one sentence, you got a problem with your PBM. So anyway, that's our one sentence proposal for how we want to make money. Other PBMs, it takes 10 pages of text to explain how they make money.
I've
If
seen
all
it,
of that stuff were to come to the surface, then it would be an uncomfortable reckoning. We can administer a claim, we can administer a benefit for a client, a large Fortune 500 client, for something on the order of, $4 or $5 a claim. Most traditional PBMs are pulling in retained revenue on the order of $15 a claim or north of that in some cases. On smaller accounts, it could be $20 a claim. So what kind of uncomfortable questions are going to come up when the PBM has to surface all of that fee structure onto the table for clients to scrutinize, right? Why does it take you 3x the retained revenue to administer this benefit when these other vendors over here can do it for $5 a click? And
wonderful questions. Yep.
That to me represents a competitive pressure that these companies cannot deal with, right? So it is margin compression to the point that I think that they would potentially even be exposed to fiduciary lawsuits on the shareholder side.
Okay, well, that's a big deal. So, that shareholder pressure point is significant. And you mentioned Consolidated Appropriations Act. There's some interesting sort of industry speculation since the passage of this year's Consolidated Appropriation Act, which has some delinking concepts and has some, I would say, some material transparency reporting within Medicare as well as within the commercial market, and sort of what is the impact. I would also note that it seems like some of the larger sort of old world PBMs are trying to get out in front by marketing themselves as moving to sort of these front-facing transparency models. Something that has struck me, and I'd be interested in your thoughts, is, for me, Capital RX is very much transparency and implementation, right? It's not retrospective reporting. Use a transparent pricing index. On the drug side, you're passing through rebates on the other side. And, I'd love your thoughts on if you really think that the Consolidated Appropriation Act is going to genuinely change the PBM business model, or if it's more sort of putting lipstick on it and making it look transparent. I can tell you something that struck me is, you said you guys are essentially fee-based, service-based. And some of the delinking legislation that did pass and become law, to me, is in certain ways trying to emulate that, right? Sort of emulate the model that you all set. But that said, detail in legislation matters. And so, it has, hey, PBMs are going to earn a bona fide service fee in Part D, for example. But yet there's a rule of construction exception that the rebates can be passed through to the prescription drug plan, which oftentimes is the insurer that either owns the PBM or that the PBM owns, right? So if the PBM can't keep those rebates, but they're passing it back to an affiliated, vertically integrated entity, you just went in a big circle.
Yeah. Well, it's hide the cheese, right? And there's plenty of dark corners within the LLC, outside of the LLC. United Healthcare, I hate to single out, a particular big vendor, but they have over 2,000 LLCs, 2,000 subsidiaries. There's plenty of dark corners remaining where these PBMs can tuck away hidden margin. Look at, for example, the white label, the co-labeling structures that they've created for biosimilars and in some cases generic drugs. You've got Qualent Pharmaceuticals in the Cayman Islands. You've got Cordavis with CVS. This is all essentially an opportunity for them to take what has historically been rebate revenue or other retained spread and move it upstream, right? Up the supply chain to an entity that they still control and enjoy the profitability from. So I don't have a lot of faith in the PBMs following through on the true spirit of the transparency requirements that are coming out. I think what you're going to see is a mad scramble for the shadows. And I think there's still plenty of dark shadows for them to hide margin in.
Yeah, now, I agree 100%. Yeah.
The tap dancing is in full effect, and I do appreciate that. And to some extent, I like to see that because it's at least us now starting to have a real discussion about what does transparency and what does alignment mean, right? But looks like a sheep, growls like a wolf. That to me is kind of how I kind of characterize a lot of what I have seen so far coming out of the big PBMs.
Yeah. And so, would it be fair to say a lot of sort of their posturing in light of the passage of consolidated appropriations and just the microscope and the scrutiny of some of the old world PBMs. Is it like do you sense that there are legit, and again, I think it's a separate conversation of are they going to adhere to the spirit of these laws, but do you think there's a genuine move by some of the old world PBMs to transparency? And do you perceive that as a threat to a true transparent PBM? Or do you think it's more marketing and trying to get out in front of it and sort of manage the public relations?
So I have a couple comments on that. First of all, it's not a threat if clients understand what they're buying. It's a threat to the extent that it muddies the waters from a messaging standpoint, because we continue to do things meaningfully different. Even compared to what these new sort of, quasi-transparent type of marketing efforts are. But it makes the conversation more complex. Now clients need to start peeling the onion and really understand the layers that are at play here. And it's already challenging for employers and buyers to understand this market. So, it's going to continue to be challenging, but we do have to also acknowledge something really interesting about this, and that is that this is all happening at the same time that there is this phenomenon around cash pay price offerings and what I call sort of cash pay price neutrality, which is starting to emerge. That is to say, historically, list prices under benefit plans have been sky high because of all those big rebates, right? And then the cash price for a product quietly could be obtained, for much lower. But now we're seeing that cash price move into the public forum, right? We're seeing direct offers from Lilly and Novo on GLP-1s. Other pharmaceutical manufacturers are following suit, saying, "Oh, wait a second! Like we can show patients what the real cost of this drug is, right? And start having a real conversation about drug prices." To me, that creates another interesting challenge for the big PBMs, which is that for so long they have claimed that our size matters. Because we're bigger, we can haggle on pricing here and get a better deal for you on the unit cost of these medications. But when we achieve cash price neutrality, when everyone is using the same language for price, and finally, like price is just out there for a drug like a GLP-1, then the size matters less. The size and scale for purchasing power is less significant. I think a lot of that landscape starts to flatten. And that, I think, eliminates probably the one historical advantage that these bigger players have had. And so now we're left. Yeah, it's scale. And now we're left with bigger questions, which is like, so what does an employer or a buyer really get from a PBM? And it comes down, I think, to service and efficiency. And so that's what I think employers are starting to ask is, are these big PBMs truly more efficient than a small PBM with a modern platform? Are these big PBMs delivering better service, or are they, farming all our calls out to another country because it's cheaper? Are they 30-minute average speed of answer? Those kind of things. So, those are the real questions I think that get to now the patient experience. We've been on this call for almost 30 minutes. We haven't mentioned the patient yet. The patient's at the center of all of this, right? Notwithstanding transparency, notwithstanding all these PBM deals, what's best for the patient? And so that really is a part of the other challenge that we're focused on solving.
Very good. And you mentioned efficiency, you mentioned technology, and Judi, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this. I'm certainly not a technology person, but what I've heard is sort of the old world PBMs are also like using very like antiquated technology on the administration side. Is that, is that accurate? Because I've heard that. I don't know.
Yeah, the majority of the industry, as you know, the majority of volume for our industry is concentrated among the big three PBMs, the three largest, right? They control about 3/4 of the market right now. All of those claims for all three PBMs run on platforms that are at this point decades old. The largest of
decades old, really? Wow.
The largest of those, the code base for the largest of the platforms that transacts the most claims in the country right now, the code base was written in the early 1990s, in 1993 originally. Right?
So it's like from a technology perspective, they're playing Pong. Is that fair to?
It is. Let's be clear. Like it's pre-internet. This is pre-internet technology.
Wow.
These are server-based platforms that, I mean, imagine like literally servers in closets that these companies have to maintain. They have engineers, they have coders that are probably at this point 67 years old that they're keeping on just because these are the folks that are the only ones that understand these old world languages. And so they are really, really struggling. Where we see them struggle is, I can tell you tons of examples from clients that have come to us and they're just like shocked at how quickly we can get things done. They go to their old PBM and they say, I need to change the copay for this drug because this new regulation came out requiring me to offer a $0 copay on COVID medication, something like that, right? Let's say there was something that happened in market. The PBM will come to them and say, oh, we could do that, but it's going to take about 90 days for us to recode that in the system. And then they come to a Capital RX, we're cloud-based, modern. And when I mentioned Judi earlier on, cloud-based, modern language, human user interface that's very intuitive. They come to us and say, we need to change a copay. And our answer is like, do you want that done like in the next hour, or do you want us to hold off and schedule it for tomorrow? And I mean, it's not that we're necessarily faster than the speed of business right now. It's that the rest of the industry is running on rusty rails that are
really interesting. And I think the point you make is counterintuitive. There was, and I don't want to misquote, but I think that there was a post or an article from drug channels just this week that seemed to sort of speculate that the larger PBMs are actually better positioned to adapt quickly to regulations and industry changes. And I know that not all smaller PBMs are transparent, and I know that not all smaller PBMs are equal, right? But it sounds to me like sort of with sort of you all are able to leverage your technology and leverage Judi in a way that you are able to implement and adapt faster than the big three when it comes to the technology side.
We're fairly uniquely positioned in the if you put us in the bucket of like sort of challenger PBMs, if you will, PBMs that are challenging the status quo, that are already living in an aligned model. The good news for us is twofold. For Capital RX and Judi Health specifically is twofold. Number one, all of this wave of regs and legislation that's come out, our lawyers, our compliance experts have looked at this. It has zero impact on our model. We have not encountered any regs or new requirements that have imposed anything meaningful that changes the way we're already doing business. So where this legislation and regulation is dragging the rest of the industry kicking and screaming, we're already kind of there saying, welcome to the party. We've been doing it this way for 7 years. So that to us is a benefit because we don't have every new reg that comes out, we don't have to overhaul our systems to comply with it. But I would say even more importantly is that we're already at the destination of where healthcare needs to be from a tech standpoint. And that's a distinction for us as a challenger PBM, because there's a lot of other really great PBMs out there that frankly are operating in a transparent manner, fully aligned, doing things the way I would want them to do as an advocate for plan sponsors, but they don't necessarily have an infrastructure play. They don't have a platform that allows them to also be nimble, agile. They're maybe renting a platform from an older PBM. And so that is it puts us in I don't want to brag, but it puts us in a relatively unique position.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Congressman Auchincloss, who's a big advocate for PBM reform at the federal level, he uses an expression, he wants to move where the puck is going. And it sounds to me like you feel very much like CapRx is positioned already. You're already where the puck is going.
That's right.
From a technology perspective.
That's right. We have kind of a tagline around this. What we say is we're trying to build the infrastructure that this country needs for the healthcare that our people deserve, right? Okay. I mean, the administration of claims, technology has become a barrier to care. How long does it take to get a PA decisioned? 7 days? 10 days? For a pharmacy claim? That's absurd. That a patient has to sit for 7 days wondering whether they're going to get access to a prescription. Yeah. Right.
Absolutely.
So again, invest in tech, AI intake of the forms, a lot of efficiency you can gain if you have modern tech. We can get that down to 3 days or less. So that's where technology translates into a better patient
experience.
Right?
Okay. Yeah. Technology, but also melded with practices, right? Because you did mention things like the the rebate-driven formularies and driving patients to more expensive medications, and they're not getting the benefit of necessarily those financial decisions at the pharmacy counter. So it really sounds like it's a mix, right? It's the technology as well as the transparent practices that are aligning and converging to give that patient a better experience.
That's right. Both elements need to be there for a successful for success in this industry.
Yeah. Now you said something, and for folks who maybe don't know you well or haven't worked with CapRx, you sort of said, hey, there's essentially zero impact, right, as some of these transparency efforts are moving forward at the federal level. And I can say, like, you were the first PBM that I've ever seen that showed up in a state, and there was an effort for NADAC legislation, right? And there's a big federal push now. There's some states, but it was, hey, let's move to a transparent drug pricing, market-based index. And while sort of the old world PBMs were losing their collective minds, you showed up and you said, hey, we're already aligned with this, and this is good for transparency, and it's good for drug prices. And you showed up and you said it. As I recall, you actually did a magnificent job testifying in some hearings as well. But I mean, money where your mouth is, right? It's easy for somebody to go on a podcast and say, hey, there's no impact, or hey, this is where we were going already. But that was that was back in 2020.
That's right. Yeah, and I'm still out there shouting the same stuff from podiums, so I haven't changed my rhetoric at all. But it is interesting. There's a lot of sky is falling, Chicken Little tactics going on right now amongst the old world PBMs.
Yes.
If you move to NADAC, it's somehow the world's going to end. Or if you make us show you what our rebates are that we're receiving, we lose our competitive advantage. This is absurdist rhetoric to me. Like, there is never a situation where secrecy and exclusive access provides better price, right? Yeah.
Beautiful.
Always an open ecosystem for competition drives price down. Look at gas. Look at gasoline. It is the most open market. You got a gas station here on one side of the street and a gas station here on the other side of the street. Both of them post their prices literally on a sign in massive font. And those prices are always within pennies of each other.
Yeah.
Always. Yeah. It is a hyper-competitive supply chain because the buyers have full visibility into the economics. They understand what they're paying for, and they understand what the cost is. Ask any go ahead and call up a traditional PBM and ask them, what is the price of amoxicillin? And their answer will be, well, that depends. We have about 4,000 prices for that drug, depending on who the client is, who the patient is, what pharmacy it's at, what time of day it is, whether we feel like increasing or decreasing it on the MAC list.
I love that you brought that up. So, we've done a little work on this, but 46 Brooklyn has done, I think, an excellent job, like pointing out in some of their, and 3-Axis, pointing out in some of their studies that, like, a drug with no NADAC change that may be like $3 may have hundreds upon hundreds of different drug prices over this period of 12 months, sometimes even over the period of a month. Yeah. Within the Medicare program or within certain commercial markets, right? Like the same PBM administering the same claim on the same day, right? Like just massive variability throughout a day, throughout a month, throughout a year, when during that same period of time, the NADAC was essentially unmoved.
Yeah, this is by design. I'm not sure if you know this, but this is how much of a super geek I am around pharmacy supply chain. I literally will go and look at patent applications and approved patents by some of the large established vendors, just kind of see what kind of solutions are they working on. Are they developing a new platform? Maybe they are. That actually would be welcome, right? Here's what they've invested in. One of the biggest, currently the largest PBM in industry, I'm not going to name names, but I'm sure you can kind of figure out, has a patent for a MAC list management software application that actually manages and manipulates MAC price on a claim-by-claim basis. So they see the claim come in, they compare it against how their performance is on their network contracts and on their client contracts, which, by the way, are two totally separate ledgers. And we could talk about single ledger versus dual ledger in a moment. But it compares its performance and adjusts the price in real time on the drug to hit an optimal mix of performance for the PBM so that they can hit the network contract but still earn money on the client contract.
That is unbelievable. Wow.
This is literally real-time MAC management. It used to be the way they used to do it, I can tell you, is they had a room full of analysts, a room full of MAC managers, MAC list managers, crunching these numbers and changing them as quickly as they could, usually daily. But now when they move to this, we're now seeing minute-by-minute manipulation of MAC lists. And that is why when a patient goes into a pharmacy, it feels like the price of drugs changes.
Yeah. So, but just to level set that, right, in a period where these old world PBMs are essentially saying, hey, we're moving towards transparency, and we're moving towards at that same time that they're having these conversations in these public facing positioning. They're literally like going all in on some new technology that allows further manipulation of drug price on a claim by claim basis.
Real time price manipulation.
Real time pricing manipulation. That's, I mean, that is stunning. I mean, to me, that's like deep dive article worthy stuff.
I think it's, again, wow. I'm an Uber nerd, so I will live and breathe this stuff all day. But it's the details. It's the details, right? It gets back to what we said, right? It looks like a sheep, growls like a wolf. So you really do have to peel the onion here. Yeah.
So wow. I mean, that's amazing to me. But this is really relevant, right? There's still pushes to move to sort of a transparent market-based index. CapRx utilizes NADAC more.
We do NADAC, yeah.
Right, more than I think any, probably any PBM certainly that I'm aware of. Yeah. One of the things, and I want to, you and I got our start in Georgia. I don't know if you followed, but about 2 years ago, there's a big push to use NADAC for state health benefit plan in Georgia. Okay. And the PBM that was administering claims came in and they said, yeah, NADAC may lower, and we got all this through open records, and NADAC may lower the ingredient cost, but the dispensing fee is going to drive costs, up. It's going to cost upwards of $17 million. The thing that was interesting in Georgia is the math actually got done, right? The math actually got done. They did a claims repricing, and even adding on increased dispensing fee, there was I think around just about $11 million in savings according to their math.
It's essentially cost neutral to
it was essentially I mean I think it's probably within 1%.
AWP MAC based arrangement, go ahead.
Yeah, what I want to ask you is what the PBM then came back with was, but to administer NADAC, the costs are going to go through, right? Like to administer NADAC, it's going to increase costs. So the actual savings, but which again, what wasn't like earth shattering, but there's probably about a 30 million swing between what they said it was going to cost and the actual savings by capping their ability to mark up at their affiliated specialty pharmacies. But what they then said is, even if it saves money, it's still going to cost the state more because it's going to be more expensive to us to administer using an index-based model. Does that jive with you? Like, what's your reaction to that?
That's a red herring. When they say increased cost to administer, what they're saying is recapture of lost margin.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So they are enjoying a certain level of hidden margin associated with spread-based arrangements, AWP MAC. And if they lose that, there is a cost to them, a lost revenue cost that they need to recoup. And that is recouped typically through an increased fee. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This phenomenon of when you get the fees on the table, it creates a very uncomfortable moment for the traditional PBM because they have to acknowledge, we want to keep this revenue. And it was $15 a claim or $10 or $20 a claim. And now this now becomes existential for them. So,
okay. Yeah. Want to pivot quickly to see if this is an issue for you, because again, you indicated that yes, like you're not even having to necessarily market in the traditional sense, right? It's a lot of your growth is organic. Fortune 500 companies are coming to you. Are you something that independent pharmacy, who I've represented, proudly for years in various settings, right? They are certainly susceptible to some, what I would say are, unfair methods of competition, right? Like just legitimately anti-competitive behavior. Do you run into, hey, there's a large employer or there's a large client or potential client who wants to use CapRx, but do you hit like anti-competitive roadblocks? Is it difficult for you, even when you have a client who wants to use you in this world of vertical integration? Do you run into sort of what you would feel are unfair or anti-competitive practices that keep folks from moving over? Is that a problem for for the
we
industry?
do occasionally. Now
Okay.
we've got 5 million lives, so we've already climbed a lot of these hills and gained data exchange capabilities with all the big vendors. But especially in our early days, we found that there was a blocking and tackling technique that the vertically integrated vendors would use very frequently. And this is sort of a weird little nuance that actually stems from Obamacare, from the ACA, and the fact that a lot of deductible plans right now, high deductible plans, actually integrate the deductible between medical and pharmacy coverage, which means that the medical plan and the pharmacy plan have to have a handshake on a regular basis. They have to have exchange of data that says, what do you think the deductible is? Oh, okay, well, let me sync up with your deductible and make sure that we're tracking consistently, right? That handshake for us is very easy. It's called Open API. We're built for integration in a modern cloud-based setup. But like I said, these old world platforms, they really struggle with this. And so for them, there's a cost burden. And also they realized, well, hang on a sec, we could use this as a way to discourage clients from leaving a carved in type of arrangement where the carrier and the PBM are the same entity, the vertically integrated. So what we ended up encountering was a client that wanted to move to us on a pharmacy benefit arrangement, but they wanted to keep their medical plan with a large carrier that owned a PBM, right? And that carrier would say, okay, well, you can carve out, but we're going to have to charge you $400,000 to create this data feed where we send the deductible information to the pharmacy, which is egregious and very obviously an anti-competitive tactic to discourage the client from pursuing what they want to do as a fiduciary that they think is in their best interest. And so we frankly have had to fight a lot of those battles. And in some cases even had to just sort of pay to make it go away out of our pockets in the interest of getting these clients on board and getting them to the model that they wanted.
Okay. And you mentioned the word fiduciary a couple times, and you mentioned sort of fiduciary and potential fiduciary suits from ultimately shareholders, fiduciary suits from employees against employers is something that we're starting to see emerge as well, right? Do you think, what would your message be to employers, right? Like, do you think from an employer perspective that this is something that should be of concern, right? Like doing things the right way, moving to a transparent PBM that isn't engaging in sort of some of the old world practices and leveraging some of the old tricks and new tricks. Is it in an employer's best interest to move to a PBM that administers claims, transparency, efficiently, et cetera?
Yeah, fiduciary concerns are at the very core of what's driving plan sponsors' worries about this industry right now. There are class action lawsuits, to be sure, right?
There are some out there,
Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, some examples. These are in various stages of dismissal or reconsideration or appeal, whatever. It looks like the JPMC one might have legs to go to trial, or at least is headed that way. And so these are real fascinating litmus tests to me of the problem of misalignment within the supply chain, right? And I'm old enough, I've got enough gray hair to think back and remember in the early 2000s, we went through this whole thing on the retirement plan side. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but historically, the retirement industry, 401k and pension fund industry, was riddled with hidden fees and intermediaries that were deriving a lot of profit in ways that didn't always work in the best interest of the fiduciary for the benefit plan, the pension fund, or the 401k plan. And ultimately, it was that fiduciary pressure that forced lawsuits against some large employers and labor unions. And that's what turned the tide on the retirement fund industry. And that's why now we have essentially all these funds are now just fee-based. All the fees are transparent. We got things that basically mandate that appropriate level of transparency, so we don't have the distortion of interest there, the misaligned interest.
Makes sense.
This is what's happening here in the world of class action lawsuits and ERISA fiduciary responsibility is a direct echo of that same movement that happened in the retirement industry 20 some odd years ago. And the attorneys, the class action attorneys, are pulling from the exact same playbook because they realize this is as bad or worse than the misalignment that existed back in 401k land in 2000.
Yeah, so, absolutely.
And so, employers are highly concerned. And so, that has created frankly, a massive tailwind for us because we can very easily demonstrate that we align with fiduciary interests. You mentioned delinking. We're already delinked. We don't make profit from the dispensing of drugs. We leave that up to the pharmacies, let them run their operations, let them make the profit they need to be sustainable. We're just administrators here, right? And we try to just be as efficient as we can on that front. And so to us, like all of these new world concepts, delinking, all that stuff is just create the awareness of that as a need in industry is just created a massive tailwind for us. So yeah, I would say the focus on fiduciary responsibility is part of what's driven the big interest in our model.
Got it. Very good. Very good. Listen, I think I've one last question for you, and this is maybe to our independent pharmacy audience, some of those that are listening. But I'm as guilty of this as anyone, right? But I do think in the independent pharmacy world, there can be a tendency to talk in echo chambers, right? And sort of talking to ourselves. Do you think it's worth sort of working to bridge gaps, get outside the echo chamber, work or start better communicating with employers, creating more synergies there? Like, do you think there's opportunity for pharmacy to better engage with and work with employers?
Yes, if they're the right intermediaries are in place. I don't think you're going to find that in an old world PBM model. Yeah. I think that is intentionally confrontational, antagonistic to the community pharmacy mission.
Agreed.
But in a model like ours, you mentioned NADAC. One of the reasons we chose a cost plus index published index like NADAC is because we realize that there is a sustainability issue in community pharmacy right now, and that community pharmacies are pushed to the brink and they're starting to fail patients, right? And from a care delivery standpoint, because they just don't have sustainable revenue models. And so we saw the writing on the wall, frankly, 10 years ago on this, 7 years ago. And it's one of the things that pushed us to NADAC, because while you mentioned overall reimbursements to pharmacies are more or less comparable, the reimbursement pattern is stabilized because you've got that dispensing fee in a more consistent delivery to the community pharmacy, allows them to predict cost and profit a little easier, and to create a more sustainable pattern of service delivery. So for us, that was important because, we're seeing it now, pharmacy deserts, closures of community pharmacies, especially in rural and inner city areas, where all of that is avoidable if you create a sustainable economic for these pharmacies. And you can do that without necessarily driving costs up. You just have to be smart about it.
Yeah.
So I didn't mean to cut you off, but to the extent that these pharmacies want to start having dialogue with employers, I think that's great. And frankly, there are some high cost providers in the ecosystem that probably it would make sense to start moving utilization to lower cost community pharmacies if they're able to demonstrate that value.
Yeah. And again, I do think that obviously there's benefits to cost plus transparent index-based pricing on the pharmacy side. But I also, when you talk about sort of these patents for real-time MAC manipulation, that, using a transparent based index from my perspective, right, the price is the same for everybody, right? And it's right. Public, and you guys have leaned into that really in many ways from the beginning.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be crazy if every drug just had a price?
Just had a price.
It turns out it does. Just not everyone wants to use it.
Yeah. So. Very good. Well, man, this has been amazing. Can't thank you enough for coming on, and an open invitation anytime you want to. This is really, I think, an exciting perspective to hear. So just greatly appreciate you coming on, and thank you.
Yeah, glad to be here and appreciate the dialogue. It's been great. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.